Stephen Miller, he is an investigative reporter who has been featured in many different magazines speaking about climate change, conservation, and other environmental issues. So, Stephen, thanks so much for coming on the program. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So, Stephen, let's talk about this. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about you and what made you want to become an investigative reporter?
Yeah, I'm an environmental reporter. I've been doing that now for many years. I've always enjoyed being the outside, and that's really what it comes down to. When I got started as a journalist, I think I kind of looked around the landscape at the time and noticed that there was openings for people writing about the environment, and I love being outside. And so I just figured I'd give it a shot. Next thing I knew, it kind of became my whole career. One of my first writing jobs was with the climate assessment for the Southwest down in Tucson, Arizona. So I started off writing about climate science, really dense stuff that was really boring. And it kind of got like my feet wet in the idea of trying to figure out how to translate scientific jargon into stories for regular people. And everything kind of ballooned from there. Since then, I've done a lot of work in environmental justice. I was an environmental justice editor at ES Magazine based in Seattle for many years. And last bit, I've been freelancing. I freelance environmental stories for national publications like Nat Geo and Discover Magazine, Huffington Post, Sierra, High Country News, places like that.
So when you are writing about all these environmental issues that just keep happening consistently throughout our country and even throughout the world in general, what do you hope the reporting that you give to the viewers and the readers exposes them to?
Exposes them to the reality that they see every day. Honestly, I think a lot of people are seeing this stuff on the ground. They're seeing the impacts happen every season, whether it's big floods or big fires or big storms. And I think it's been politicized to the point where it might be easy for some people to think this is just the way it is, or maybe the way it's always been. But it's not true. And the scariest part for me is that, the likelihood is that things are going to get much worse before they get any better. And if people aren't willing to recognize that, then it's quite the uphill battle we have in terms of making life livable for folks.
Why do you feel a lot of people aren't getting this in their head? We have all these people, whether they're president of the United States, whether they're just regular politicians that claim that climate change is a hoax. Climate change isn't real. Meanwhile, a little small rainstorm in Miami floods half the streets. We see droughts, hurricanes galore right now, and the season's even extended later than it's been in the past. So why are people not getting this, that this is truly going on and we're in deep trouble in this country?
Yeah, I think it's because people think this is a political issue. I really don't think that the environment is a political issue. The environment is central to every aspect of life on this planet, regardless of what country you live in or what political ideology you subscribe to. And I think we've been told in this country, especially over the past few decades, since like the 70s, that the environment is a political issue, and it's not. But I think until we can kind of cross that barrier, until environmentalists can find a way to get people who don't believe themselves to be environmentalists to care about the environment, we're never going to see any real progress on it. But I think the whole idea that, some people write it off as it doesn't matter. I've heard some folks say this is just the way the world works, and humans are natural, so humans are going to play a natural part on the planet's in the outcome. And I mean, honestly, I can't disagree with that. Humans are natural. Even plastic is technically natural. Everything that you see in front of you is natural, depending on your definition of natural, I guess. And I think that's maybe that definition is the problem, is the thing that we're not connecting on. But I guess short answer is I think it's just politics, and I'm looking forward to the day when the environment is not a political issue.
So we do see younger groups such as the Sunrise Movement, which has come on the scene in the past couple of years, and they've really pushed politicians to the Green New Deal. With that said, when you talk to people all around the country and all around the world about climate change, about environmental issues, do you feel like this is more of a young person's issue, that they really care, or do you feel like there's older people that care about the environment too?
I really do think it's across the board. In my experience, it feels like it's maybe on the different ends of the spectrum. I mean, I've interviewed kids, kids who are suing the government for the rights of nature, and I've spoken with older folks who are leading, pretty successful local movements toward environmental legislation or regulation in their states and communities. Lately, it seems like younger kids, younger folks have been getting a lot more attention, especially in the media, and I think that's because there's been this pretty successful campaign around the idea that it's the truth that these people are going to inherit the earth. They're going to get what we give them. The next generation is going to have to deal with the impacts of the decisions that we make today. Older generations don't have that problem, and so when I talk to older people who care or don't care about it, it kind of seems to hinge on, their opinion hinges on whether they see themselves as responsible for the livelihoods of those that come after them. For older people who see it like we've got what we've got, and I just kind of want to live out my days as happily as I can, maybe they don't care so much. But for people who feel like they have a responsibility to future generations, well, then I see them out in the streets holding up signs.
I agree. This is Stephen Miller. He's an investigative reporter. He's been featured in National Geographic and also HuffPost, and he talks about climate change, conservation, and more environmental issues. How and when did you become an environmentalist?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think it happened gradually. I can't really pinpoint a moment. I mean, I was lucky in a sense where I grew up all over the country. I was born in just outside Pittsburgh, spent most of my life in Southern Arizona. I lived in the East Coast in DC and Baltimore for a while, and I spent a long time in Seattle before I finally ended up where I am now in Colorado. And I think honestly, for me, like seeing all the variety and the ecosystems and habitats on this country, from I grew up in the green woods of Pennsylvania, and then I ended up in like the brown desert of Arizona. And I think for me, that showed me something really fascinating about the continent's habitats, its biomes, its ecosystems. And I just became fascinated by it. I think I guess I am an environmentalist. I try to avoid pegging myself with terms like that, but I guess that's technically true. And if there's any reason for it, it's because I'm just fascinated by the natural world.
With fracking going on, we hear about the methane being released into the environment, which is even worse than people driving cars because it's so toxic to the environment. We see President Trump is pro-fracking. Even Joe Biden has come out and said that he doesn't want to stop fracking. He wants to keep this up. I have been told that we saw in Oklahoma, I think it was in the past year, they've had quite a few earthquakes. Even in Pennsylvania, they were having earthquakes due to fracking, not to mention all the polluted water due toward the underwater fracking as far as the hydraulicness of the fracking. Can you talk about that issue and how bad it really is for the environment? Because I'm pretty sure that it's taken place a lot in Pennsylvania and in Colorado also.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, so I left Pennsylvania when I was pretty young, and I have not gone back there to do a whole hell of a lot of reporting. But I mean, it's prevalent here in Colorado. Just driving around, I live in a more rural part of the state, and you just drive through Colorado for a bit, and you'll see fracking. The infrastructure for it all over the place, and it's become a heated issue, obviously, in large part because for landowners, it offers a possibility of some income. And when you look at the physical space it takes up on the ground, it's actually not that much. So you can farm around it. And I see a lot of farmers who have a fracking facility right in the middle of their farm. But that said, I mean, Denver area, Front Range of Colorado is notoriously some horrible air quality. And a lot of that has been linked to all the natural gas fracking that goes on in the area. I've heard some people explain it where, it's not so much that one individual plant or something has a huge leak. What it is every little fracking facility around the state might have a small leak, a small bit of excess or inefficiency that ultimately adds up to a real significant problem.
But these things are polluting the water, and also obviously the methane being released is terrible for the environment, correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, fracking gas being released in the atmosphere is awful for it. I'm not particularly aware of a direct link between fracking wastewater and natural drinking water or the environmental water. I would know those things happen, but I can't speak personally to it.
Okay, fair enough. I do want to get into an article that you wrote. And again, this is Stephen Miller. He's an investigative reporter. He's been featured on HuffPost and also National Geographic and many other news sources. But you did write an article, and it really caught my eye a couple weeks back in HuffPost. And it was, and the title is, and I'll read it right off the screen right now. It's how we got conned into drinking bottled water and how we can stop. I think this is important to everyone because I see people all over the place just literally drinking bottled water.
Yeah. I think the bottled water thing is a huge issue all across the country. But what grabbed me about it is like it seems so illustrative of the larger issue facing the environment and climate in our country especially, but across the globe ultimately. And that is just this culture around consumerism and convenience. And I mean, this is really what we see. We see it with cars. We see it with housing, construction practices. It's not solely about bottled water, but for me, bottled water was really something that brought it home and kind of like, it's like the whole issue bottled, into this one particular little thing. And I mean, in the article, I start off by talking about hiking one day up in Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park, and coming across a discarded plastic water bottle next to the trail. And for me, that was just kind of, I don't know, I grew up in the desert. And so having water I always have water with me. Anytime I'm going hiking, I've got water. But the idea that you could just like throw water away like that kind of blew my mind and just kind of hit me that we have come to a place in this country, especially, where we've created a product that nobody really needs, the plastic bottle, and made so many of them that they've become superfluous to the point where we can just ditch the most necessary thing on the planet, water, along the side of a trail because we just don't feel like carrying it anymore, or it fell out of our bag and we weren't paying attention or something. And I don't mean to accuse people because I mean we all make decisions like this, and at the end of the day we're all just kind of going through life doing the best that we can. But I guess what I wanted to do with the story was just bring this awareness about this issue in the hopes that if nothing else, it would just open people's eyes a little bit to something they see every day.
So we all know about how soda and it's come in plastic bottles, aluminum cans in general. How did bottled water become so popular in the U.S. and around the world?
I think the marketing is really what it comes down to. At the time in the 70s, when I think it was 74, when the PET bottle came around, DuPont invented this bottle that was capable of holding carbonated beverages. It could be broken down and recycled, reformed into a new bottle or new material. It's a pretty great product. And when that came around, people, I think it was around the same time where people's water in their cities was actually okay. We started to chlorinate city drinking water. And so it got rid of a lot of the problems like dysentery and things that have been plaguing American cities for years. So the result was this marketing campaign designed to get people who didn't need to buy bottled water to think that they should. And I think that the primary focus was kind of two-pronged. It was on the one hand trying to convince people that their drinking water from the tap was unsafe. And this is something we still see today. We still see a lot of fear around like what's coming out of your tap water. The other prong approach, which is probably the most effective, was convincing people that bottled water was actually healthy, that it was part of a healthy lifestyle. Came around the same time, aerobics became a big thing. And you're kind of drinking, there's branding images, advertisements of people drinking beautiful, thin, attractive people drinking water from a bottle. And the idea being that this is kind of like this wellspring of life, So ultimately, I think it was a very successful marketing campaign.
You think now with all these other infrastructure issues due to water issues, that this is a big problem now, and this is playing right into bottled water, Nestle, Coca-Cola, all these companies that have interest in bottled water, that all these water issues in these cities and states, it's playing right into their hand.
It is. It is playing into their hand, but I think at the same time they're making it play into their hand. I mean, yeah, there are issues, and there are cities across the country that do from time to time experience issues with their bottled water, safety issues with their tap water rather. And obviously they're the big stories. I mean, DC, Flint, the most obvious. But I mean, there's more than 330 million people in the U.S., and most of them get very safe tap water directly, from the faucet in their kitchen. So I think that's why I say it's a marketing campaign, is that the industry has been successful at hyping up a few instances to kind of engender this idea of fear among people into believing that they need bottled water in order to stay safe from their tap. For me, is a more reasonable way to go about addressing issues with the safety of tap water would just be to have a filter on your own water supply at your home, reverse osmosis, or even a pure filter. You just screw it onto the faucet or one of those things you pour it into. That would solve the problem in terms of giving people safe drinking water without having to create this massive environmental issue of all this wasted plastic.
Can we talk about this? And you can debunk this if these aren't true, but I've heard these rumors quite often that we talk about where this bottled water is coming from. First, I've heard a lot of it is coming from the tap, and it's just being bottled. Secondly, I heard a lot of this is coming from different states. You may live in Colorado, but the bottled water from Poland Springs may be from Florida, and they're draining these natural springs and the water from people that live in Florida, from these animals that need that water to live on, that live in those type of areas around the spring, and it's being drained and put into bottles and shipped all over the country. Are those two things true?
They are true. I mean, there's a couple of things to keep in mind with it, though. I mean, the one hand is the water taken from the tap, and most bottled water is filtered heavily, many times, usually filtered many times before it goes from the tap to the bottle. So it's not as if it was just taken directly out of the tap, but it is still often tap water. I mean, this is something that I think Coca-Cola really excelled in back in the day, was they recognized that you no longer had to have this natural spring. You weren't selling natural spring water, artesian water source. You could just put regular water, filter it, stick it in a bottle, and people would buy it that way. So that's absolutely true. A lot of these companies, they do take water, from city taps and aquifers all across the country, and they do that in large part to cut down the distribution, rather than shipping it across the country. If you're pulling from an aquifer on the West Coast or the East Coast, then you can kind of keep it your distribution relatively local. They are paying. I mean, it's not like they're stealing it necessarily in terms of the law's perspective on stealing the water, because these companies are paying for access to the water. The problem is that there's not strong enough regulation in these states to limit the amount that they're taking, or to keep that water local. And there's been efforts in Florida, there's been efforts in Washington State, Oregon, other places to fight back against this and keep these companies from pulling water out of an aquifer and selling it outside of the state. But they've been largely unsuccessful.
But aren't they paying very cheap rates for the water that they're getting from these aquifers?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we all pay cheap rates for water that we get out of the tap.
Right. But no, I meant more like that the companies are paying cheap rates for the money that they're getting from the aquifer, bottling it and shipping it around wherever they ship it to.
I'm saying, and that's kind of the whole joke for me, is like, we're all paying cheap rates. We all do technically pay cheap rates for water from the tap, whether it's Coca-Cola or us personally. We're buying the same water for the tap. The difference is then, a lot of people turn around and pay 30 times more to buy that same water, filtered from a bottle from Coke.
Because I've heard this a lot, Stephen, that a lot of these bottles, if they sit in the sun for a long period of time, or even not that long of a time, if that temperature is so hot, whether it's in a car or if you're at the beach in the sun, that can lead to some serious problems with the water because of the plastic. Is that true, that it can get real, I don't know how to describe it, but it's really bad with the plastic melting into the water?
Yeah, well, there's issues with plastic exposed to heat and radiation, that leaching into the water that's inside the bottle. That has been an issue, I think, more in the past. It's important to remember one of the serious issues with plastic in general is there are so many different types of plastic.
Hmm.
You look underneath, your plastic water bottle or your plastic food container or something, you're going to see a number on there. And I forget how many numbers they are off the top of my head now, but there's plenty of them. And they're all a different makeup of plastic. Some of the lower numbers are numbers that have been around that we have means of recycling, in some cases composting. Some of the higher numbers are more complicated to break down. And that's the biggest issue, I think, for the plastic industry and plastic management industry, is that there are just so many different types of plastic that have so many different characteristics.
Right. So
So how do you
this is,
manage them?
go ahead, Stephen. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, how do you manage all these different, different types of plastics? That's an issue that's been confounding for waste management people.
Right. When you put it in the recycling, how guaranteed is it that that stuff is being recycled? Because I'll just tell you from where I am, we get letters in the mail that if the box has, is glossy letters or this, you can't put it in, or you got to throw it away.
I mean, you're not really guaranteed. This is a problem, and I think this has been a communications problem for people too. It's like you said, it's complicated, and all of us live in a place where if we have recycling available to us, it's often complicated, nuanced. You get these things, mailers that tell you all the different things you can and cannot recycle, and you're looking at this and trying to decide, does this go in here? Which bin does it go in? I don't know. I mean, in more progressive cities, you'll see waste bins that have recycling and compost and landfill and plastics and glass and all broken up. And I just sit sometimes and watch people approach these waste bins, and they kind of stare at what they have, from their takeout food, and they're like, what do I do with this?
Right.
And that's a huge problem. It's like, what do you do with it? And often cases, it's not that cut and dry. Even where recycling is well managed, it's still a big if as to whether the product is going to be properly recycled. Plastics, and it really depends on the type of material. Plastics, I think, in the U.S. are particularly low in terms of recycling rates.
Oh, wow.
Glass and aluminum are higher, and paper, I think, is also much higher. One of the reasons for that is in a lot of states, there's a buyback. If you return aluminum cans or glass bottles, you get a nickel, depending on your state. You get money back for that. That exists for plastic in some states, but not all states. And so that's been an issue in that Break Free from Plastics Act. That is a piece of legislation that's been proposed, has not been voted on yet. Mentioned in my article for HuffPost. That's something that they're trying to initiate. Would be a federal buyback program that would encourage people to actually bring their plastics back, because we've seen that has a big impact. If you get money for returning a product or an item, people actually do return it.
So,
I mean, I find the same thing. When I was reporting that story, I looked into the specifics for the Denver area on recycling and composting plastics. This has been a big thing in the industry now. Materials engineers are putting a lot of effort into developing what they call sustainable bioplastics or compostable plastics. Essentially, plastics that are not made out of virgin oil stock, but that are made from corn or some other biomaterial. And the idea is that these things are going to break down and compost and disintegrate. I think there's a sense that it'll address ocean waste, because if you were to throw a compostable piece of plastic, bioplastic, into the ocean, there's this sense that it'll break down within a short amount of time, or that a turtle will come around and nibble off of it or something. I mean, that's just not true. The fact of the matter is that these things will still take years to break down, and they will still be present in the environment for a long time to come, and animals are not going to eat them. And even local recyclers and composters, your city managers, might not know how to deal with them. In Denver, I cannot recycle plastics noted that are labeled as compostable, and the composter won't take any plastics of any kind. So, what value do I get out of purchasing a compostable plastic?
so let's move on. You spoke about plastics. Can we talk about how a lot of this plastic is made? Because from what I've read and what I've been told, the way this plastic is made is really bad for the environment, the process that it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, we're harvesting. For a long time, plastic was made out of crude oil. That has largely, I think, been phased out, and now we're using it's fracked natural gas is what it's been using now to make most plastics, which goes back to this issue around fracking. So we're harvesting oil or natural gas. We're cracking it open to use it to make it into a plastic product. We're blow molding that plastic into a bottle form. And then we are filling with water or something else, and we're distributing it all across the country. So the environmental impacts on that, not only the production of the oil, the harvesting of the oil, but also the production of the product and the distribution of that said product. I think from what I've heard from a lot of folks, the most important aspect of this is simply the cost of gas and oil. These days, a barrel of oil is cheap, natural gas is cheap. And as long as those products are cheap in their virgin form, there's no incentive on bottlers to recycle or reuse the product that's existing, that's already out there.
How do we stay away from plastics? Because of, basically what you just said of how bad it is for the environment, when basically everything you buy in a grocery store is made of plastic. So how can you even get away from some of these things?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I mean, there's so many books written by people who try to go plastic free for an amount of time, and it's almost impossible. I mean, it's so hardwired into our culture. Whether take out food to, medicine is a huge issue, right? We've discovered that medicine, the medicinal world has really has found a lot of success with plastics, and you can't negate that. It's not that all plastics are bad. I think when I speak with environmentalists even and materials engineers, they often say it's not that all plastics are inherently bad. The big problem that we're dealing with is consumer disposable plastics, single-use plastics. Mm-hmm. These things like the little forks and containers and plastic bottles. And the reason is they're not necessary. We have alternatives to them. And in some countries of the world, that might not be true. I've done some reporting in Bangladesh, and you look around there. I mean, in some cities in Bangladesh, they still bring in water in big barrels, and so getting clean drinking water to people across the country is a real struggle, and plastic bottles can be a huge benefit there. But in the U.S., we don't have that problem for the most part. There are places where tap water has seen issues, but we have ways around that. So I think for the environmentalist, for the average person who's just looking to address this issue, it's just about being cognizant of what you're buying and where it's going to end up. It's not enough. In 2020, it is no longer enough, I think, for a person who considers themselves an environmentalist to buy an environmentally labeled product. The reality is you need to think about where this thing is going to go, where it's coming from, and where it's going to go, how long it's going to stick around.
And again, this is Stephen Miller. He's an investigative reporter, and he has done work for National Geographic and also HuffPost. But I guess what I want to hit on is when these plastics and this garbage is being put in the issues or not picked up on the beach and then they go into the ocean, a lot of these fish eat it. And when the fish eat it, it stays in their system because they're not broken down. If we eat this fish, then we're eating plastic. Not only that, when these whales and these dolphins and other sharks, whatever it is, that are in the oceans, because we're doing overfishing, that's another big problem. So I feel like our oceans are in extreme bad shape. With those two issues, what is your take on that with, the plastic in the fish and also the overfishing in our oceans?
Well, I mean, they're separate issues, but I think at the end of the day, one of they are tied together with this idea, I think, of consumerism, where when you buy a piece of plastic and you don't think about where it's going to end up, I think people really need to remember we live in a closed loop system. We live on this planet. The stuff doesn't go anywhere. Just because you buy a piece of plastic and think it's being recycled or put it away, get it out of your vision, that doesn't mean it disappears. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's blown my mind is the face wash. There's a lot of brands that sell face wash that have these little micro beads in them, exfoliating micro beads. Right. I think these are largely being phased out and they're being replaced with things like, ground up oatmeal or whatever. But there's still a lot of these little tiny bits of plastic in so many things that we purchase, in hand sanitizer. And people just don't make the connection that this doesn't just go away. It stays in the system. If you're using it in the shower or something, gets washed into the water, wastewater, and it can end up into a freshwater or ocean water stream. Get picked up by creatures, and it's just like the circle of life, man. It just gets eaten by the next biggest thing until eventually it gets back on us. And then you come to the overfishing issue, where maybe because we don't see the ocean, you can't really see all the fish in it on a daily basis. We just kind of seem to imagine that it's just full of fish that we can just take forever. And that's clearly not the issue. That's the truth. I mean, I recently reported a story for HuffPost about fisheries in Alaska. And, small scale fishermen there, kind of similar to local small scale farming, are fighting big time fishers to maintain a healthy resource in the oceans.
But I want to talk about what's going to happen with Florida, as South Florida, Key West, Key Largo, these places are right on the water. And with the sea level rise, what's going to happen to them in 2050? Are they going to be underwater? How long does Florida have left before the dang peninsula is underwater? Not to mention a lot of these other cities all over the East Coast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how long you have left, but I do know there's a lot of effort and money being thrown at, keeping the ocean at bay. There's large seawalls and dikes planned, for the Miami area. There is a proposal for a giant seawall, in New York City.
Right.
The issue now is transitioning. Now that we're aware that climate change is happening, and we know that people are being personally affected at the home level, and that our economics and our infrastructure is being affected right on the coast, we're throwing money at the issue of adaptation and trying to resist the sea level rise, resist the storm surges. And I've seen this in Bangladesh and other parts of the US, even in Japan, that these efforts don't always work the way we think they're going to work. And in some cases, they actually cause whole new sets of problems. At the end of the day, I worry that what we're really doing is putting a Band-Aid on the situation. We're not really addressing climate change. We're trying to make it so that we can, just everyone can continue living the way they want to live right up against the coast. When the reality is, if you want to continue living on the coast, South Florida coast, you should probably invest in a boathouse, because your house is not going to be standing on anything in the not too distant future.
You're an environmentalist right now. With these two candidates, both for fracking, both don't really have huge plans for the environment in general. Who should you even vote for? What should you even do?
You should vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind you should vote for Joe Biden. Nothing would be better than Trump.
Yeah. I
mean, Trump has made it his prerogative to dismantle what little environmental protections still exist today in this country. Biden might not be perfect, but at least he wouldn't actively do that. Worst case, I think, is, we've seen after Obama made some significant efforts in some places in terms of environmentally, but Trump made it his prerogative to undo everything Biden had done. That's kind of his platform, right? My worry would be 4 more years of Trump would just codify all the deregulation that Trump has pushed for over the previous 4 years, and I think that would be an astounding loss to the environment in this country.
What are you up to next? Any new projects you're up to tell the viewers before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on stories about more stories from Huffington Post, looking into some ecotourism things, and I'm also I'm working on a book about climate adaptation. That's my kind of large scale project that I've been working on now for over a year.
And where can people find more about you, Stephen, before we go?
You can find me at StephenRobertMiller.com.
Okay.
And I'm on Twitter as @by_SR Miller.
All right. And I'll definitely put those in the description box. Stephen, thanks so much for your time today, and I'm happy we got this done. I know we had some issues at the beginning, but we solidified it.
It worked out. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you putting the show together and having me on. It means a lot.